Not hearing anything.
Thank you. I'll try again. So welcome to tonight's shiur. Today is Thursday, Parshas Bolok, Yud Beis Tammuz, Hag HaGeula, and today's shiur is dedicated by Mr. and Mrs. Pinchas Rabin in honor of their newborn Einikol. Parents David and Ethel Hurwitz waited 24 years for Baruch Hashem, this moment of having their own child. Bez Hashem, Ken Yerbu. We should have lots of nachas from him and from future siblings. Let's go on to today's questions. But before that, we have here, I mentioned to you last week, a week before, about a son of mine who does rendering. So for those like me who don't know what rendering really means, this is a artificial picture put together by him to help architects and balabatim understand what a future project will look like. Another example in a moment. So there we are, another example. And Baruch Hashem, if someone needs such a service, so be in touch with me and we'll be, help you make the contact. Baruch Hashem. Okay. So someone asked me a question about the psukim in Hallel and in a later chapter in Tehilim. Seems to be the same pasuk. There's a change of wording. Here in Hallel it says, Osnaim lohem v'lo yaazinu, that have ears and they will not v'lo yaazinu, and that's in Kuf Lamed Hey. And in Hallel it says Osnaim lehem v'lo yishma'u. So why is there a difference here, lo yishma'u, and here is it lo yaazinu? So I did look around, and I did not find any of the Meforshim who addressed this straight. What I do know is that there's a difference between another difference which discussed in the past and published, how we have a difference between the style of presentation in Hallel and in later. So in Hallel we have Yisrael b'tach b'Hashem, Beis Aaron b'tchu b'Hashem, and Yirei Hashem b'tchu b'Hashem. So we've got three categories: Yisrael, Beis Aaron, and Yirei Hashem. Those three titles come up another two times in Hallel. Like Yomana Yisrael, Beis Aaron, Yomana Yirei Hashem. We look in chapter Kuf Lamed Hey, we have another category. Beis Yisrael, Baruch Hashem, Beis Aaron, Baruch Hashem, Beis Halevi, Baruch Hashem, Yirei Hashem, Baruch Hashem. So we have now a fourth category, which is Beis Halevi. And so the Meforshim do explain and say that the Hallel, which we say on Yom Tov, etc., that's called Hallel HaMitzri. It's celebrating Yetzias Mitzrayim, Yetzias Yisrael Mitzrayim. And at that point, the Shevet Levi hasn't been identified as a separate entity. And therefore, there's no Beis Halevi B'tchu b'Hashem. In the later, in Kuf Lamed Hey, this was composed at a later stage. Once Shevet Levi is identified as the servants in the Beis HaMikdash and the Mishkan, and therefore they are identified as a separate category. Having said that, possibly we can then go back to the two phrases. If is it Osnaim lehem v'lo yishma'u, Osnaim lehem v'lo yaazinu. Both of the meaning of both of them is to negate Avodah Zarah. The difference between Shmiya and Hazino we know from Chazal, Hazino Shemayim v'Daber Sishma Ha'oretz, etc. That Hazino is from close by, to listen from close, and Shmiya is from a distance. So possibly the earlier form is saying Avodah Zarah v'lo yishma'u, that they don't hear and from a distance. By contrast, the Eibishter does listen. It's contrasting to the Eibishter, lahavdil. In the second, in the later chapter, where it's already after Matan Torah, so then we have that the Eibishter is not only listens from a distance, but listens from close by. And therefore, Znaim Lohem V'lo Yaazinu, saying Avodah Zorah doesn't have this kind of listening in from close by, whereas the Eibishter listens even from close by. If someone has a better pshat, of course, one was happy to listen. Let's move on. Now, I unfortunately do not have the piece of paper. I'm here at the, perhaps I won't be able to find it. I'm here at the simcha of Mishpachas Dubov. So I'm sorry, I'm bringing it up on my phone. So I'm giving the shiur from the grandstand. I can look over and see where the horses would run here in Isher. Okay, so the first shiur which I have for today is that last Friday, close to Shabbos, a shliach from somewhere in Central Europe calls me that there's a large ship, a cruise ship, which is docked, which seems to be it's a popular resort, and the way it works out is that the ship, there's a limited amount of space for all of these cruise liners to be moored at the port, and therefore it's common for them to have one next to the other, and so the people in the passengers in the third ship or the second ship, if they want to walk onto land, they would go through the ship closest to land and then use that as a bridge to get to land. So he's asking, there was on the fourth ship, in this case, were about 20 Yidden, and they wanted to come off the ship, go onto the other three ships and come onto land, and then go back on Shabbos. Just to make it a little bit more complicated, that during Shabbos, ship number 3 would make its way onwards, and therefore ship number 4 would be released and tugged out a little bit further to allow ship number 3 to move on, and then it would be moored back and would take position number 3. So the question was, are they allowed to get on and off the boats, these ships, on Shabbos? So at the time, I got a little bit confused between two dinim. I wanted to clarify this. Afterwards, at that moment, I didn't have the clarity, and that's why the benefit of the shiur to sit down and look it through. And that is, there's two separate dinim. One is about whether you're allowed to stay on a boat or go onto a boat, which is going to travel onwards on Shabbos. There's a second din, whether you're allowed to enter a boat altogether on Shabbos. And so one is in Siman Shein Lamed Tes, and the other one is in Siman Reish Mem Ches. We're going to first look at the Shein Lamed Tes halacha, and that reads the following. The Alter Rebbe says that a boat, you're not allowed to swim on Shabbos. You're not allowed to enter a boat on Shabbos. What about if the boat is grounded? Then you are allowed to enter because it's not floating. Then he says, if the boat is kashura, if the boat is tied, moored to the harbor, keminig hasfinois ha'im is normal, as it's normal for ships which are in the harbor, that they are tied to the harbor, to a post in the harbor. Although the ship is actually bobbing on the water, mutar likonis. So a ship which is tied, you're allowed to enter. So that's very useful to know. That you are allowed to enter. No, we're not talking about going anywhere else. On the contrary, it's staying put. So although it's floating, but because it's tied to the port, that's okay. So coming back to our question, so long as the boats are tied to the port, there's no shiur at all. Then that brings us to the other question. And at the time, that triggered in my memory of a story which I had several years ago about a certain wealthy balabos who has an idea that he likes to daven at least Shabbos with a minyan. He has a private yacht, And wherever he goes, he makes sure to get a minyan to come on to join him. So he was going to park the yacht somewhere, some city, whatever, and he wanted to arrange that some bochurim should be able to come onto the yacht on Shabbos. Now that was a bit more complicated because the yacht was not moored to the harbour. On the contrary, it was perhaps 100 yards, 200 yards out in the sea. And to get there, you'd have to get onto a little boat to get out to the yacht. So that was another parsha whether the boys would be able to go and join them on Shabbos. So now, let's now look at the second quote. It says here, not allowed to enter a boat on Shabbos, even if you're traveling for a dvar mitzvah. If you enter the boat before Shabbos and you're still on the boat, so then if the boat moves on Shabbos, that's okay. Because you entered the boat before Shabbos, so then you can stay on the boat as it moves on. However, if you left the boat, you would not be allowed to go back and travel on Shabbos. There's a more lenient opinion which says, and that's the bottom of the page on the screen, yesh matirin, if you were koine shvisa, if you entered the boat before Shabbos and you were there during bein hashmoshes for those 3/4 of an hour, then you went back to spend the night at home, you could come back and get onto the boat and travel on Shabbos. So if you had for whatever reason, your journey is on Shabbos, so if you were able to be koine shvisa on the boat before Shabbos, you'd be able to come back to the boat on Shabbos. In the Kuntras Achron, you can see this little daled. We said that if a person is on a boat, he's allowed to stay on the boat on Shabbos. What about going to another boat? This the Alter Rebbe says in the Kuntras Achron. Let's see if I can get it over. Yeah, he says you would be allowed to go even from one boat to the other, so long as you have gone onto dry land. And this, the Mishnah Berurah refers to this in Siman, I think Shin Lamed, he refers to the Alter Rebbe who says that if he hasn't gone into dry land, he even goes from one boat to another. But that's not our discussion. Our discussion is whether there is a heter to get onto a boat in order to make up a minyan. Yeah. So in Shim Lametes, in the Sharet Shuvah, he quotes from the Shabbos Yankiv. He allows you to get onto a boat on Shabbos within the Tchum to make up a minyan, lavoil to travel with a minyan, if the boat isn't traveling for Yidden. So let's say we know there's a place in London called by Woolwich, and there's a ferry which goes across from one side of the Thames to the other. So would you be allowed to go onto the Woolwich ferry to be able to go onto the other side and to daven with a minyan on the other side of the Thames? So according to the Shvus Yaakov, he says you would be allowed to, and apparently this was quite a common thing, where they had the city would provide a ferry for people to cross the river, and so you would be allowed to go across the river to make up a minyan. Then the Noida Yehuda addresses this, and he says that if the ship is traveling for Yidden alone, that wouldn't be okay. It's difficult to be matir. Later on, I know this is a little bit of a tangent, the Noida Yehuda asked the following. He was asked the following. There's a boat which is crossing the river. In order for me to get onto the boat, I need to be koine shvisa. Going back to what we said before, assuming that I need to be koine shvisa. But when I cross the river, I want to be able to go another 3,000 amas. So I need to lay in place an eid of tchumen. So how does the eid of tchumen work? I put down a box of matzah and I say, Ki'ilu, I spent the night, I'm living there for Shabbos. So I want to get onto the boat because I was kind of shvus on the boat. I want to put an eid of tchumen to be able to go another kilometer. So how is it not a contradiction? So he says that's not a problem. It's okay to have that contradiction. But on the idea of getting onto a boat in order to make up a minyan, that he says he doesn't want to give a psak one way or the other. Now, coming back to our situation, which I had this few years ago, all this discussion is talking about getting onto a boat, a rowing boat, which is going to no melacha involved in a rowing boat is not a melacha. It's the shiur of the rabbanon of rowing, floating, and there you could say possibly hey mamru. You could say this the mitzvah of davening with a minyan is the shiur of going onto a boat. Yeah, that's a possible argument, but I believe this trial was 5 years ago, whatever, and I believe that the boat which would take them from the coast, from the harbour to the yacht, would have been a motorboat. And motorboat means already there's an engine and it is meloches, and therefore I don't see any heter. Even their matter, only matter is the rabbonim. No one will be matter is the reise to allow you to take a boat, a motorboat, and especially for you to make up a minyan. And Bichlal, the Mr. Brewer, in a couple of places, talks about this getting onto a boat. And he's in Tofresh Yud Gimel in Hilchos Yom Kippur. He says to get onto a boat in order to make it to daven with a minyan, he doesn't allow. In Hilchos Rosh Hashanah and Hilchos Sukkos, he talks about getting onto a boat to hear shofar or to bench lulav. That's a mitzvah deraisa. There he is more lenient to allow you to get onto the boat in order to fulfill a mitzvah in Torah. We're going on to the next question, something which came up, which was a surprise for me, and that was about Tefilas haDerech. So now, Tefilas haDerech is when you're traveling out of town, and we have a special tefillah which is mentioned in Gemara. There was a time that Reb Menachem Garlitzky was driving to Montreal, and he was informed the Rebbe of his journey, but he got from the Rebbe a whole settle, which has been published since, how the Rebbe encourages him to remember to say Tefilas haDerech, and then also to encourage others to say Tefilas haDerech. And the Rebbe says he has the impression that people are not so careful about it, and so the Rebbe encourages an awareness of Tefilas haDerech. Okay. So the shortest journey to warrant Tefilas haDerech is a journey of what's called a Parsah, which is the equivalent of 4 kilometers. Now, Hiluch Mil, Dalat Mil. So traditionally, we understand it takes a person to walk a mil, it takes a person 18 minutes. So to walk 4 mil takes you 72 minutes. So it's a journey of 72 minutes. So some poskim have taken this further and said that now if you're traveling by car and you're traveling a distance of more than Daled Milin, but you're traveling in less than 72 minutes, so that doesn't require Tefilas haDerech. There are those who say that. So here I've got from the Piskei Teshuvos, Siman Kuf Yud. He quotes from Yabia Oime from Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, and he quotes from a sefer in Nesivei Am. And the minig in Eretz Yisrael mikadmas duno. The historic minig is not to say Tefilas haDerech unless you're spending 72 minutes on the journey. I'm touched by the humility of Rabbi Hagoin and Rabbi Vadia, where he's quoting a sefer in Nesivei Am, which is very much a contemporary writer, and certainly very likely far from the tremendous knowledge of Rabbi Avadi himself. And he's saying that there's a minig Eretz Yisrael mikadmas duno, that if you're traveling by car, you wouldn't say Tefilas haDerech unless you're traveling for 72 minutes. I question how long before did they have cars in Eretz Yisrael? There's a common thing to say that there's a minig mikadmas duno. At any rate, so there are those who say, he's not the only one, who want to say that possibly a journey of less than 72 minutes doesn't require Tefilas haDerech. However, others say on the contrary, that because now our form of travel with cars, we're not worried about highwaymen, etc. On the contrary, on the other hand, we are worried about safety of driving, and that is there would be an argument even in town to say Tefilas haDerech. Certainly, one shouldn't be, how you say, diminishing the need for Tefilas haDerech. On the contrary, it's more important. Having said all that, so this whole discussion of 72 minutes for Tefilas haDerech was all news to me. And then I thought to myself about the time where the Rebbe travels to Gan Yisrael. 3 times the Rebbe travels to Gan Yisrael. There's a volume called Bin Ois Deshe, which documents those 3 visits of the Rebbe. And the Rebbe's journey was, if you know the map of Greater New York, the Rebbe would travel from Brooklyn up through Manhattan, up through the Bronx. North of the Bronx, there's an area called Yonkers, etc. And somewhere over there, there's a river. This is all on the coast of the Hudson. And then there's a bridge across the Hudson called the Tappan Zee Bridge. And so the Rebbe's car drives across the Tappan Zee Bridge. And then there's what they call America, a gas station, a petrol station. And the car stopped there. The Rebbe got out of the car and said Tefilas haDerech. So the Tappan Zee Bridge is 5 kilometers. So until the bridge, it's all built up. It's not chutz la'ir. The only chutz la'ir is once you've crossed the bridge to the other side of the Hudson. And the Rebbe said Tefilas haDerech. How long does it take to drive across the Hudson? A 5 kilometer stretch. If it's a 5 mile stretch, normally it's 10 minutes, whatever. Certainly not 72 minutes crossing. And so the Rebbe did say Tefilas haDerech. So obviously, that this idea of 72 minutes is something which we would not follow la halacha. And if it's a journey of more than 4 kilometers out of the built-up area, we would say Tefilas haDerech. We move on to the next point on our list, and that is something which was quite a surprise for me, and that is about the definition of carrying something, moving something kilach hayad. Okay, so the story is the following: that someone receives a delivery into his apartment building. He lives in an apartment building. Let's say there is an Erev, but he is worried that if the package is left in the foyer downstairs, it won't be there at the end of Shabbos. So he wants to be able to carry this box, and he knows it's muksa in the box. I gave an example. It's a box of paints. Muksa machmas gufa. If it was a clothing or dishes, that wouldn't be muksa. But here he knows that inside it's a box of paints. So it's muksa, it's a muksa. So he can't pick it up in the normal way because he's carrying muksa. So the question is he able to lift the box with the back of his hands and bring it to a safe place? And so we know that there's a general ruling that you are allowed to move muksa kilach hayad in an unusual way. What is the definition of unusual? So in many places it talks about moving with your back and moving with your foot and moving with your body. It's not so clear that moving with the back of your hands qualifies as kilach hayad. So I looked around. For example, I took the Sefer Orchos Shabbos, all examples of kilach hayad. It doesn't mention that you're using the back of the hands. Then I looked in the Encyclopedia Talmudis under muksa, under the subheading of kilach hayad, and he refers to the Alter Rebbe as being one of those who say clearly that using the back of your hands qualifies as kilach hayad. So let's read that inside. This is in Siman Reish Ayin Vav. Now here's talking about, it's not Hilchos Muksa, here's talking about Miri L'Nochri. Are you allowed to ask a goy to carry a lit lamp from one place to the other? So let's read that inside. To carry a lit lantern, you want to ask the goy to bring the lantern, which is a burning flame, from B to A. Yesh matirim. There are those who said that you are allowed to ask a goy to carry this lantern for you. even if you can manage without it, whether it is an air shiver, whether it's a wax candle, whether it's an oil lamp. And he says, why are you allowed to ask the guy to move it? Moving a lantern, a lit lantern is muksa. You are allowed to move muksa in an indirect way. And the kiven shehashoyel beatzboy hoya yochel lohovi aneir lekan beheter betilto min hatzad. Something which I could do even in an unusual way, kagoin ba'achoyre yodo, with the back of his hands, or by natzila yodo, or under his elbows, or etc. Since the Yisroel himself could do the same act, albeit in an unusual way, therefore, when he asks the guy to do so, and he does it in a normal way, that doesn't matter. Because you can only not ask a guy to do something if there's no way you'd be allowed to do it, b'derech heter. But if there's a way you could do it b'derech heter, you are allowed to ask a guy to do it. This Seheba, the Alter Rebbe, has defined that carrying betilta min hatzad, which he means here, kalach hayad, means ba'achoyre yodav. I know elsewhere the Alter Rebbe does discuss carefully the difference between tiltul min hatzad and tiltul kalach hayad. But I believe here he means in an unusual way. And he says with the back of your hands or with your elbows. That's just not a normal way of carrying things. And later on, the next sip, the same phrase comes up. So therefore, what we're seeing here is the Alter Rebbe does recognize carrying muksa with the back of your hand also as kil achar yad. Rabbi Ber Levin, in his commentary, and this place he shows all the other places, but it doesn't say the back of your hands count. But what can we do? Here it says it does count. So I believe that's good enough. So, and this also, this whole asvara to say that the back of your hands doesn't count as a shinui enough to allow you to move muksa, but that would also have a bearing on so many other things where, for example, for a choyle, you're allowed to do a melacha kelach hayad and shin chopches. So what does it mean kelach hayad? Does it mean dafke with your, I mean, let's say if you needed to use a telephone or Shabbos for a choyle, she'ein b'sakana, so you're allowed to do it kalach hayad. So what does that mean? You can't use your knuckles? You have to use, I don't know, you can have to use your toes? I don't think so. I think that this is enough of a shinui, enough of a departure from the norm to say that it is called kalach hayad. Okay. Let's go on to the next question. And that is whether it's okay to, so a shliach asked me, they have a cleaner, and but washing the dishes after Shabbos, by then the remains of food have become dried and stuck to the dishes, and they're complaining it's a much more of a geschäft, much more of an effort to clean the dishes because they were left to dry out. So is there a heter on Shabbos to put the dishes in a bucket of water, in a bowl of water, perhaps with a bit of soap, not because you want to prepare, but you want to prevent them from getting, well, I won't use the word ruined, but becoming more of a geschäft to wash after Shabbos. So let's read here from Shmiras Shabbos Kel Choser, and this is in chapter 12, chapter Yud Beis, and he's talking about preparing on Shabbos for after Shabbos. So normally you wouldn't wash dishes on Shabbos for after Shabbos. He writes the following. Number one, that's in the Yud Beis. If you have dirty dishes and you're worried if you leave them as they are, they will attract bugs, etc. And for that matter, if you've got silver dishes and the contents, maybe acid content, will ruin the silver if you don't remove those contents. So you are allowed to soak them on Shabbos in water, even though you don't have any intent to use them on Shabbos, because you're not doing this to prepare. You're not putting the dishes in the water to prepare them for after Shabbos. Rather, you are doing so to prevent the gathering of bugs. Then he goes to Sif Gimel. He says another similar situation, that Tehilim, which after taking the food out, the remnants, will get stuck to the walls of the keli, and that's going to make it difficult to wash the dishes after Shabbos. So you are allowed to soak them in water, because this soaking is just to prevent a degeneration, so to speak. It's not, you're not doing it to prepare. You're doing it to prevent the drying out. If it's already dried out, that's a different story, because then you're doing it to make it easier to wash afterwards. But if it's not dried out, you just want to preserve the current state. He says that is okay, and he doesn't see this as preparing for after Shabbos. He sees this as preventing a damage, preventing a nuisance for after Shabbos. It is for after Shabbos, but it's not preparing, preventing a nuisance. It's preventive rather than a proactive. Okay. What I find even more surprising, though, is that in the note Ches, he writes, when you want to clean up the kitchen because you have guests, have a guest who's coming, and you're embarrassed to have the dirty dishes present, that's also called Tzorech HaShabbos, and you would be allowed to wash the dishes to get them out of the view of your guests. And he quotes the Sefer Shulchan Shlomo, who was, I believe, a contemporary of the Alter Rebbe. I did not get around to looking it up. I found this very surprising. And generally from a Heiser, the dishes are not washed during Shabbos, and they're left in the sink or whatever, and covered over if necessary. So, yeah, but those who are makel, that you have there a source to be lenient. Right. We go on to the next question, which is about using a holiday time. You're going to renting a cottage somewhere, and there's a microwave oven. So are you allowed to, is there a way you can use the microwave oven? So one thing is, if the food is wrapped, so generally that's accepted that the double wrapping is enough, even to put food in a tray for oven. But what about, could you kasher it? Can you kasher a microwave with putting in a cup of water, and then it's going to be full of, for 10 minutes, it's going to be full of steam, and that steam will kasher the microwave, the oven. So I'm going to say first Balpeh, and then we'll read inside. My general take on this is the following. L'chatchila, you don't buy a tray for microwave and rely on kashering. You can buy other ovens you can buy and rely on kashering. There's halacha, but in the microwave, the kashering is a bit of a shvacha kashering. If you already have a microwave and somehow you took some chicken soup, you didn't realize, took it out of the freezer and you warmed it up in your milk microwave oven, and now it's a b'di'evet. Do you throw away the microwave or do you kasher it? Here we will say, b'di'evet, you could rely on kashering, but don't rely on l'chatchila. So now, back to our question, you're going on holidays, are you allowed to use the microwave there by kashering with hot water? So, a few points here. In the microwave, there's also a bichlal kashering only works for just for blia, for absorbed taste. If there's a tangible presence, kashering doesn't work. The microwave generally has a vent behind, and the gunk, a lot of fats, etc., will accumulate there, and usually it's very difficult to have access to that part of the oven, and as a result, you can't really clean it. So, all right, so you're going to say you're going to spray it with oven cleaner. It's not so thorough. Then I have another question. Someone actually asked me just this morning, can you kasher a pressure cooker with regular boiling water? The question is that the pressure cooker, regular water reaches 100 degrees Celsius. In a pressure cooker, it can reach, let's say, 150 degrees. I don't know the details. If something became treif to 150 degrees, can you kasher it with 100 degrees? So the truth is that you can then say a deep fry oil becomes much hotter than water. So can you kasher a fryer with water? And then I saw someone raising another point. Can you kasher something which was used at a lower altitude at a higher altitude? Because at a higher altitude it's going to boil at a lower temperature. So that's more of a far-fetched scenario. But it's for sure that there are food that cook and become hotter than water does. And still we learn from the Parsah, that's in 2 weeks' time in the Seder, that you can kasher with hot water. Okay. So we have a halocha that you can kasher with hot water, even though the pot is actually has absorbed non-kosher at a higher temperature. That's okay. That's all very well if you're kashering with water. Here, with a microwave, you're not kashering with water, you're kashering with steam. That's a chiddush. So to say that the steam is going to match the temperature of the steam, okay, I can go along with that. But I'm not so confident, because it could be the steam of the water is not going to be as strong as the steam from the pizza or whatever was used in the oven before. So it's not such a reliable kashering. So let's read what he writes here. Now, I did a bit of a search on this and came up to a sefer called Yone HaParsha. I've heard of the sefer before. It's more sefer on the Parshas HaShavua, but it's halacha essays on the Parshas HaShavua. So just one little paragraph out of an essay of about 10 pages goes through all the different opinions about this, and he says in the summation that some poskim say that you can kasher with steam only for basa v'cholol. Now, but not from isur leheta. There's a very important concept in halacha to differentiate between what's called isura bola or hetera bola. If it was absorbed, kosher food, it just happens to be that meat and milk are not compatible, that kashering is a much more lenient form of kashering vis-a-vis kashering from mamash trade. So that's what we see here, that is saying that although we can be meichel with kashering with steam from fleishiks, the milkiks, that kind of mix up, but if it was mamash treif, yesterday it was used for pork chops, whatever, there's kazafets absorbed in the oven. Some say that kashering with steam is not good enough. He quotes here from the name of Rabbi Yashiv, kasher a microwave from Isur and from Pesach. You shouldn't rely on zayah. You shouldn't rely on steam, and not even with a stream of boiling water. So that's even even stronger type of kashering, and also that he wasn't happy. So just back to our question, you kashering a microwave while you're on holiday, not really, and it's not really adequate to kasher with steam. So you're better off sticking to warming stuff up inside bags, and they will double wrapped, etc. And then they will warm up inside. It's not the same, but that's what's more straightforward. Okay. Now, next question. Someone asked me about having a shower, or for a man, having a shower after mikveh. So I told him, if a person has a medical need for this, beside but otherwise it's not really a chassidus shanhag. He said, yeah, he'd like to have a bit more explanation. It wasn't for himself, it was for someone else, doesn't matter. Actually, Rabbi Kivman from Liverpool sent me a message today that he had heard from Rabbi Marlow, the name of Rabbi Marlow, if someone does need to have a shower after mikveh, they should wipe themselves and then go back to the shower after wiping themselves. Okay, but let's explore this a little bit. So there's a famous inyan in the Gemara in Shabbos where there was the concern that people would say lo eila matar and ela eila matar. That people would say it's not the mikveh which is making Torah, but it's the shower after the mikveh which is Torah. And therefore, Chachomim in the Yudches Dover, back in the times of Shama B'Shilo, decreed that if you have a shower of X amount of Mayim She'uvim, you become Tomei again. So that's in the Yonim of Tumah V'Tara. In the end of Hilchos Mikvois, here the Day of Simaresh Aleph, we read the following. There's first a discussion Bechlal about having a heated mikveh. As you know, the story, the Alter Rebbe counted one of his merits is that he introduced warm mikvahs. It wasn't such a popular thing because the earlier poskim are really not keen on having warm mikvahs because they didn't want people to see the mikveh as being an alternative to a bath. And what it means the Alter Rebbe introduced, he saw the need in his climate that people were being discouraged from using mikveh because they were shivering, worrying about the cold. So the Alter Rebbe introduced, it's good, it's okay. You should have a mikveh warm, l'chatchila, and not to worry about this concern of it being daimel and merits. So let's read that in the last seif in Siman Reish Aleph. Yesh mi she'oser, are those who forbid pouring a kettle of hot water into a mikveh to warm it up, or to have a mikveh filled with hot water and connect it with a pipe to the river. And there are those, there are Moses, those who do allow it, but you should be machmir unless so you see, there's a reluctance to allow the warming of a mikveh because of its resemblance to a bath, to a merchatz, and the confusion because of that. And the Alter Rebbe introduces, and very, very kitzer, what does the Alter Rebbe introduce? That people were already, in his time, pouring kettles of water into the pool of the mikveh, which was, let's say, a diversion, water diverted from the river, but it was in the earth, so it became cold. You pour in a few kettles of water, 5 minutes later it's cold again. The Alter Rebbe made a whole patent, a whole idea of creating a wooden box, and that you make your same, you dig the same ditch, but instead of the water being poured directly in the walls, the earthen walls, you have a wooden box sitting inside the earthen pit, and the water of the river finds its way through cracks in the walls into this wooden box, and it's got a big hole at the bottom, therefore it's never a keli. And then you pour the kettles of water into the wooden box. So because the water is in the wooden box, not in the ground, therefore it will retain the warmth that much longer. That's the Alter Rebbe's Takonos HaMikveh, which is published in the Shulchan Aruch. So it was the takona that it's allowed, and there's also a practical takona how to do it. Having said all that, then we have here Chametveri Mutal Kalayalme La'achar Hatzvila. Sorry, La'achar Hatzvila Be'mei Mikveh Ksherim. Muteres, you're allowed to go back now to the merchatz to warm yourself up. Avalachze v'lirchotz achar, to go back and bathe after the mikveh, yesh oisrim. Now those who forbid bathing oneself after mikveh. So for the reason, although the Gemara ostensibly is talking about cases of tumah v'tara, which is unfortunately obsolete now, but many poskim brought that also, applied that also for Tefilas Isha Labala, also that not to bathe right after having gone to mikveh. That's all in halacha. Now we're talking about men going to mikveh, and that's not a halacha. That's on the level of lifnim mishur sadin, and therefore is the question in lifnim mishur sadin: is it do you also have to insist on not having a shower afterwards, or because it's only lifnim mishur sadin, therefore it doesn't matter to have a shower afterwards? That's the question. So what I have of the second quote on the page is from Rabbi Beryl Levin's volume called Shiurim Halocho L'Maisa, or Shiurei Halocho L'Maisa. In the second volume on Yeridea, he goes through this topic and he shows the various about the Mikveh Tefilah of Torah, and he brings from Alter Rebbe Hilchos Yom Kippur, Erev Yom Kippur. The impression is that for a Tefilah, not for Tefilas Ezra. But for a Tefilah, for like an Erev Yom Kippur, to be elevated, like a Tefilah for Erev Yom Tov, that for that kind of Tefilah, it wouldn't be okay to have a shower afterwards. He brings from the Tzitz Eliezer, who is lenient on that. Now, if you remember a few weeks ago, I quoted a Gemara in Yuma, I think it was Daf Lamed Gimel. There's a discussion when you do something as a nedava, is that reason to be more lenient or more strict? And I mentioned there also the example of eating on a fast day, the 3 hours. The Alter Rebbe says about 3 hours before Netz, and does that apply to a Tanis Tzibur? And the word which I brought out there is a strong svara to say that something which you're doing, not mitzad hadin, but you're doing mitzad hidur, dafka, that you shouldn't cut corners. So I think that remains the maskana, that it's not recommended, and you can see the ma'aser. Generally, people who use the mikveh would not have a shower afterwards unless they have a medical need. They may have a skin problem and there's too much chlorine in the mikveh. All right, I can understand. Sometimes there are situations that's a yacht in haklal, but and if you see someone as a chassid who's doing so, all right, so he has possibly a yacht in haklal situation. That's not a raya for the general hanhoga. The general hanhoga is that one doesn't take a shower right after mikveh. What do we have else here? We have another 2 last points, and that is, I got into a whole parsha about the fellow who had eaten bread and later had lokshin, made a brocha achroina on the lokshin, and realized, oops, I didn't make a brocha, I didn't bench for the bread. And I went to a whole pilpul, does brocha me'en sholish b'di'evet cover for Birchas Hamos? That was a few weeks ago, and I wrote about it, published in Haras of Mimim, in Haras of Biurim. Okay, so this week someone sent me a page of comments on that discussion, and something very interesting. He says the question whether Me'en Sholish covers for Birchas Hamos is a good question, but that's only if you knew about it, if you're aware of it. But if you benched, you had forgotten about it. So there's a need for a focus. There's a need, just like when you make a bracha on a food, you should have intention which food you're making the bracha for. So similarly, when you bench, you have to have an awareness of which food you're making the bracha achrona for. And if not, you're not yotze. Which for me, that was a surprise. But he brings me a couple of proofs, and I'm going to have to accept that. And that is, it has here in the Alter Rebbe's Seder Birchas Hanehenin, says if someone ate grapes, and he had wine, and he said, and after bracha lagef ma'priagef. So then the grapes are also covered with the alagef and priagef, because grapes are also priagef. If he had in mind, when he said alagef, and he had in mind the grapes, aval bistam. But if he didn't think about the grapes, he just made alagef with the wine, forgot about the grapes. Then he still has to go another by ala eitz val priya eitz, because by default it does not cover the grapes. Perhaps a bit pick on that, but it's quite a strong proof. And then later on in the same period, the Alter Rebbe says the person had, let's say, cream cakes before the meal, and then he washed, has bread, and then he benched. So then he does not need to make a bracha achroina on the cream cakes which he had before washing. If in the middle of the meal, so, oops, I forgot to make alamichya for the cream cakes which I had before, so you should make alamichya now. Now, if he didn't say alamichya now, isn't that going to create a problem for his benching for the bread which is eaten? It looks like no. It looks like this alamichya will only be for the cream cakes, and it will not be the bread. Therefore, he'll have no hesitation to make a bracha, a full benching on the bread, which he'll have presently. Okay, one more thing for today, and that is, we had this discussion about a staff member in a camp, and he's on duty when the Talmidim go swimming, and the Talmidim go swimming, they're just wearing bathing suit in America and in England, we call them swimming trunks. And so their chests are bare. Is it okay for him to stand there? He's not the lifeguard. He's there in case there's something needs to be done. He's there available. So he wants to do his chitas, he wants to do shiur Rambam, whatever, alle gute Sachen. Is he allowed to do that whilst these boys are not fully dressed? So I mentioned in passing that really you're allowed to say a bracha, but if you're bare-chested, you're allowed to say a bracha. I said it is a grobe zach, but it's minadin, it's okay. So one of our listeners, who is a shoichet, and there is a minha, there's a takona that a shoichet should continually revise the halachas of shchita on a very regular basis, on a monthly basis. There's a sefer, specialist sefer on shchita called Simla Chadosha, and so the shochtim revise it, review it on a regular basis. So he sends me from the Simla Chadosha. He's talking there about the shoichet, and he says that he shouldn't make it. Of course, if he's not dressed, he shouldn't be doing making a bracha. And then he says also he should be wearing a belt, because there's a concept of liboy hefsek bein liboy le'erba. There should be, if you have a tunic which your chest and your lower parts are not separated, that's also not appropriate to say a bracha in such a state. To be a hefsek bein liboy le'erba. And then he says, this is quite interesting, he says, even if he's wearing michnasayim, also, he should also wear a belt. Okay, I did not look up this further, but what the point was relevant to us is the following. Gam heichod efsha, lo isagi imhu mechuse be mimosno v'lamato l'malu orim. Where possible, don't rely on just if you're covered from your waist downwards and you're bare-chested above. Out of respect for the bracha, make sure you're covered the upper part of your body through to your neck. So, all right, it doesn't say it's usher. It just says heichad efsher, and absolutely, it's more respectable. And I believe those who go mitzvah tefillin and they find people who are just wearing bathing suits and they agree to put on tefillin, they will offer them a shirt or something out of respect. But minadin, that would be, it'd be kosher to make a bracha even without that. That's the last question we have for tonight. At the beginning of the shiur, I shared with you something called rendering, which is where someone with a computer creates pictures of how a building project will look in its finished form. And so if you need such a thing, I've got a contact for that. And here you can see one picture and another picture. And so if that's of interest to you, get back to me. And meanwhile, I wish you a freiliche Chag Geula and Isva'aduyas Peilos. And we should see a Geula Shleimo for B'Shav Hashem Shvus Amoy, especially the Shvuyim. And we should see a V'sachzen Eineinu B'Shuvcho Nitzion Berachmim with Moshiach Tzidkenu now Mamish. All two.
Good, thank you very much.
Right.